Oftentimes, what happens to individuals in their childhood could define who they become in adulthood. A child needs a safe and happy home to live in. But what happens to a child who does not grow up in a normal environment? Perhaps the story of Edmund Emil Kemper, the COED Killer, can answer this question. Ed Kemper was born in 1948 in Burbank, California. Kemper showed problematic behavior from an early age. He would decapitate his sister's dolls and harass cats in the neighborhood. He even killed his own pet cat with a machete and hid its remains in his bedroom. His parents, however, were too busy with their own marriage problems rather than taking care of Ed's issues. When Kemper was 10 years old, his father left the family. Kemper and his two sisters were left in their alcoholic mother's care. She repeatedly abused Kemper and told him no woman could ever love him. She was also scared of his size, who already stood at 6.4 foot tall at the age of 15. She locked Kemper up in her basement, fearing that he would harm his sisters after exhibiting strange behavior. Soon after, Kemper ran away from home to live with his father. However, his father had remarried and had no interest in keeping him. Instead, he sent Kemper off to live with his grandparents. Kemper hated living with his grandparents and frequently argued with his grandmother. One day, after having another argument with his grandmother in the kitchen, he took a gun and shot her just to see what it felt like. Then, once he realized that his grandfather was coming home, he went outside and shot him to prevent him from seeing his dead wife. Horrified by what he'd done, Kemper called his mother and explained the situation to her. She immediately instructed Kemper to turn himself into the police, which he did. After being arrested, he underwent a variety of tests that revealed he possessed a very high IQ, but he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Subsequently, he was institutionalized in a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. There, he managed to convince the hospital staff to allow him to access the assessment devices. He memorized the responses to the psychiatric tests and manipulated the test results in his favor. Finally, on his 21st birthday, he was released from the hospital with a clean mental health record and did not have to return for further monitoring. He returned back to California to live with his mother. He made friends with the local police and often hung out with them in bars and restaurants. It was around this time that murderous urges within Kemper awakened, and he started picking up female hitchhikers in the area who would become his victims. After picking hitchhiking females up, he would take them to secluded areas, murder them, bring their bodies back home, and dismember them. Since most of his victims were female college students, he became known as the COED Killer. According to him, the reason why he targeted females was simply because how deeply he hated his mother and everything that resembled her in one way or another. Over the course of 2 years, he'd managed to murder 8 women without getting caught. No matter how many lives he took, his deep-rooted hatred for his mother did not subside by any means. One day, after his mother returned home drunk, she had an argument with Kemper. This event pushed Kemper's twisted psyche to the edge, and he decided that it was time to get rid of her once and for all. Kemper entered his mother's bedroom while she was sleeping and cut her throat with a knife. Then he decapitated her and hung it on a wall and used it as a dartboard to release his anger. Next, he called one of his mother's friends over and strangled her to death. He hid her body in a closet before fleeing. Kemper, being a smart individual, realized he left way too many clues and that he would eventually be arrested. He decided to call the police and confess to everything. At first, the police were baffled and thought it was a prank. After all, they'd known Kemper for years and couldn't imagine him committing such heinous crimes. However, during subsequent interrogations, they realized that he was, in fact, the infamous COED Killer. Kemper went on trial in 1973 and pled guilty to all his crimes. When the judge asked him what kind of a punishment he deemed appropriate for his crimes, he replied death by torture. Instead, he was sentenced to life in prison. To this day, Kemper resides in California Medical Facility as a model prisoner, and he has waived his right to parole hearings many times. He says that he is happy in prison and has spent his time narrating books on tape for blind people. He also willingly helped FBI profilers understand the mind of serial murderers. It seems that his inmates in prison treat him much better than his own family ever did.